All right, then I'll give the floor to Stijn for the introduction.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stijn. I'm the Managing Director of the Dutch Data Center Association, and a very welcome to this webinar. Once a year, we, together with TUFA-IT, come together to talk about the developments in the data center industry and focusing on the European standard called the EN 5600. A lot of things are happening, and it's very important that we talk about the updates, talk about the changes and the impact and the reasons why. The EN 5600 is the first international data center standard that really addresses all of the elements surrounding data centers, from availability, security, energy efficiency. And it's a very big effort from all the stakeholders in this industry, and something I think that we can be proud of as a European industry. It focuses really on all of the things, so it's very integral. And it's very important because I think if you look at the times that we're in, where there is a climate crisis, where there's now an energy crisis, where we look at sovereignty and security from a different perspective only recently, we need to also look in the way we report things. And therefore, we need standards. Standards to show our customers, to show the world what we are doing and what sort of progress we are making and how efficient we are. And of course, standards are there from the first priority in this industry about availability, about the security, how we conform to certifications, very most and first of all important. But secondly, and I think most important for the next couple of years, is also about the transition that we're in, the green transition. So how can we monitor progress? How can we monitor efficiency? What is the exact impact of this industry? And if you look at the focus that our local governments, but also the European government has with the Fit for 55 program, there's a really big focus on this for the next coming years. And we, as centralization of IT, where we can have lots of benefits of having scale, of efficiency measures that we are being able to do, that is very important. Also looking at the initiative that we have as an industry, the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, where we look at what are the KPIs, what are the areas that we need to report on, where we need to set goals that we need to go for in 2030. So standards are very important. And this webinar gives you updates on the EN 5600s. And for that, we have a really a good expert team available. And I will start with Niek van der Plas. He is the chair of the Dutch Standards Committee for many years already. And in his professional life, he is also the data center expert for Legrand in the Netherlands. Lots of experience, but also the team of TUFA-IT is on the webinar, and they bring together more than 60 years of data center experience. So that's a lot. They're all three are data center auditors, and they are members of the German Standard Committee, the DKE, for the EN 5600. Volkmar and Marc are also editors of the 5600 and the ISO/IEC data center standards. But I will start with Joachim, who is the Global Product Manager for TUFA-IT and Head of Certification Faculty, Mission Critical Infrastructures. Joachim, can I give the word to you?
Thank you very much, Stijn. And first of all, good afternoon to everybody. And of course, thank you for hosting this event, as you already mentioned. I think also it's quite important to have such a format in order to follow the vivid development of the EN 5600 as we see it during the last 5 years. And I have some slides prepared for my talk, and I will share it right now. Okay, so we are from TÜV Informationstechnik, so-called in Germany, and we are a company of about 180 experts, to a large extent, all academics, providing services on different fields in the IT security. And this slide shows the different areas on that. That is from project management and IT strategy to software evaluation and validation, hardware evaluation. We are running 4 hardware laboratories. We are dealing with signatures and identities, with data privacy, cybersecurity. So topics are, for example, right now, the 5G or artificial intelligence. And we have for 20 years already a service for data center mission critical infrastructure. And here we do assessments, evaluations, and certifications. And we this is the reason for us also to contribute to the EN 5600. In this talk and webinar this afternoon, there have been 3 of us who are all working actively in the EN 5600 and also on the ISO standard, but there are even 2 more colleagues who are helping to define special requirements on the operating side for the EN 3-1 and also on the electrical system, the EN 2-2. And these are my colleagues, Dr. Lohmann and Falk van Luk. Well, we have a high recognition in the market and have accreditations from governmental bodies as well as authorities, not only in Germany, but also internationally. Our, well, standards are sometimes hard to read and it needs interpretation. And therefore, we see our mission in providing criteria catalogs to make the evaluation process more transparent and more reliable. And therefore, we compiled different criteria catalogs. And for the EN 5600, there also exists one criteria catalog from our side that is called TSI EN 5600. And this criteria catalog transfers the requirements to a compact and comprehensive catalog. And this is our interpretation of the EN 5600. It's our basis of assessment, but we saw during the last 5 years that it becomes also a tool for our customers and also engineering companies to have a track how to come from the scratch to a certifiable data center according to EN 5600. And if you had any touch with the EN 5600 standards, then you will see that for the part 1 and part 2, that these are all in all about 250 pages. And we reduced that to a very comprehensive catalog with requirements on 39 pages at the end. Well, the talk is about update, and I only want to give you a first overview on that. That is the EN5600 and all its parts as they are existing today. One part is the general concept, that is part one, and then we have a sequence of parts dealing with the data center design, with data center operation, with efficiency, energy efficiency. A very interesting part, also the maturity model, which is also a topic on our talk today from Niek as well as from Marc, we will see later. And the part 99 with best practices. And I had a talk on the EN5600 last year in the webinar of the Dutch Data Center Association, introducing the EN5600. And the idea in this year is to focus on the differences, what happened during this 1 year. And this is shown on my next slide. And here you see we had 4 updates on parts of the EN5600. That is on the building construction part, the 2-1, as well as on the security systems 2-5. And I'm happy to have Volkmar here on board for explaining a little bit what happens in these parts. The blue ones are the ones where we have a first draft of it published. That is the 4-8 on KPIs and of energy efficiency, and here in this case, carbon usage efficiency, and in the 4-9, the water usage efficiency. As already mentioned from my side, the maturity model. And we saw also 2 updates on the 99-1 and 99-2 environmental sustainability. And this should be the introduction to a closer look of parts of these changes and modifications and updates. And therefore, I would like to pass now to Volkmar. Thank you very much.
Okay, you should be able to hear me. Are we continuing with the presentation? No, I'll share my screen. Hang on. Screen. Oh. Okay, I'm taking over from here on. We assume that you're more or less familiar with the 5600 as it is or as it was. So this is today's just about the updates. I'm talking about personally. What?
We're not seeing your presentation yet.
You don't? Oh,
No.
hang on. Somehow, I guess for some reason. Why can't you see this? Maybe I was too fast at sharing this. How do I?
Well, if you have some trouble, we can share it via my screen and you give the explanations to that.
Yeah, somehow it's, I can see it myself, but somehow my screen is not being shared. Okay, I think I see that now. This is the first slide, EN5600 updates 2.1 and 2.5. As I said before, We assume that you're familiar with the 5600 in general. We're only talking about the updates today. Next slide, please. Hello? Okay, this is my first slide. The two parts, 2.1 and 2.5, were developed immediately after the -1, the -2, -3 energy supply and air conditioning. The 2.1 is the part called building construction. The first version of that was published in 2014, which was quite soon after the initial part. I believe the publishing date was 2013. And the next, the other part, the 2.5, the publishing date was 2016. At the time when they were developed, it's quite a lengthy process to develop a standard and have that published, agreed by all the European countries. They were not perfect. We knew that at the time when we published them, but we said we're going to publish something now, and if we have to revise it, we'll do that in the next step. So there were some requirements in one part and the other, shown here, symbolized here by the two wings overlapping, that actually belonged in the other part and vice versa. I'm using some examples here. In 2.1, there was a subchapter fire suppression, talking about an active fire suppression or fire extinguishing system, and that is not really part of building construction. In the 2.5, there were two parts: fire compartments and barriers, and also one of the central parts of the EN 5600 for the physical infrastructure is called implementation of protection class requirements, including protection class barriers. And those were initially in the 2.5, describing physical requirements. Physical requirements for data centers, but actually should be in the building construction. So what we did now over the years between 2014, 16, and 2021, when the latest revisions of the two parts were published in September 2021, there's a new 5600 2-1 and also a new 5600 2-5. They were published at the same date. And with that publishing, we managed to synchronize the requirements, meaning the updated version of the 2.1 addresses only constructional, physical, building construction issues, while the 2.5, the updated version, only describing the concept behind the security and availability features and the physical or electronic security systems. So I think we have a very clear distinction now. Both of the parts of the standard are interrelated. So there are references, a lot of references in one to the other, but it's a very clear cut now between the 2.1 building construction and the 2.5 security systems. Next slide, please. So what was updated in the 2.1? There are some new chapters that we added between 2014 and 2021. There are 7 years in between, so we took quite some work to add new chapters, add new content. One of the new chapters is outside spaces, describing what's symbolized here by a fence. So we're talking about fencing systems, perimeter security, walls, but also about temporary installations outside the building, like a rental generator or a rental chiller unit. And also we talk about underground installations like the bulk fuel storage tanks in outside spaces. Another chapter that was new is the construction of data center spaces, talking about, for instance, the protection against water, moisture, and also the accessibility of data center spaces, like in favor of ramps or no, in favor of stairs, we rather would use ramps in data centers. So it's giving more information that was collected over the years. The next two, fire compartments and building construction, in red shown here on the slide, these were the parts, the content that was taken over from the 2-5. Fire compartment is the description of rooms and their resistance, the walls' resistance against fire events, and implementation of protection class boundaries. Also important, the intrusion resistant values and the physical protection of those spaces. There were some values in the previous versions of the 2.1 and the 2.5, but those were revised now. And I'm showing on the right side this table. I think this is a very important table for all of us, because this is showing the current requirements of the 2.1 and the 2.1 regarding intrusion resistance and also regarding fire. As we see here, there's different protection classes from protection class 1 to protection class 4. And the REC stands for requirements and the RECOM for recommendations. For protection class 1 and 2, there are actually no mandatory requirements for a certain resistance against intrusion. They're just recommendations for RC2 for both of them. For the protection classes 3 and 4, typically the spaces for the technical support rooms and the IT rooms, there's a minimum requirement of RC2 and a recommendation for RC3. All of these values are still dependent on a risk assessment. So if you consider the risk to be higher, then the values should also be higher. But these are minimum requirements given in the European standard. The same applies for fire. Fire is described in chapter 11 of the 5600 2-1. For protection class 1, there's actually no requirement on fire safety or for protection against fire. But for protection class 2, risk assessment, this could be a space like a storage room or a transition room, man trap or so. The fire safety or protection against fire is dependent on the risk assessment. And for protection class 3, there's a minimum of only 30 minutes fire resistance, and for protection class 4, only 60 minutes of fire resistance. I'm saying only because so far the requirements were more than that, like either 60 or 90 minutes. And also here for the fire security risk assessment, exclamation mark, meaning you have to do risk assessment before and find out for your particular data center if that is actually sufficient enough protection for your spaces. If not, then you of course have to go higher with the values, but the European standard is providing only minimum requirements here. Another change was that the annex, the 5600 2-1 had formerly had two annexes A and B. The content of Annex A was integrated into the 2.1 at various points, and the Annex B became the new Annex A. So that's a formal change. Few other changes. I mean, these were the most important updates and changes in the 2.1. So let's go to the next slide. That's the 2.5. 2.5 was security systems. And in the old 2.5, if you're familiar with that from 2016, there was a listing of rooms that belong to certain protection zones. This is not, this list is not in the 2.5 anymore, but there is, you have to do an initial assessment. What protection do you actually need for what space? And you had in chapters in the old 2.5 describing the requirements against unauthorized access, fire events, internal environmental events, and external. What was added in the current version of the 2.5 is the chapter intrusion. And in all of those chapters, I call them here protection aspects, You have tables describing different classes or different levels for different requirements. Now, you have to kind of investigate every single space because, as I say here in one of the left boxes, different spaces may be in different protection classes for different protection aspects. So it's not just if you have technical rooms, if you have IT rooms, the security requirements for all of them are similar or this must be the same. They're not. You have to look at the individual rooms and you have to decide, you have to determine what the exact level of security should be for the what is listed here for the different protection aspects. And again, they can vary from one room to the next. In the 2.5, when you look at it, there's tables given, with the different levels or different protection classes that you can orient yourself to. And so that's the update to the 2.5. And the 2.5 right now, as I said, is only describing the concept behind different protection classes, different zones, and the actual security systems that make these spaces more secure. So these are the updates to 1 and 2.5. Hopefully there will be lots of questions from your side, and I'm more than happy to answer all of those in the session that we have after this, after the presentation. And with this, I'm handing it over to, I think Niek was the next one behind me. Niek van der Pas, are you there?
Yeah, I'm just unmuting, and I'm going to share my screen. Just a, I got the, someone else has to stop sharing, otherwise I can't share. So yeah, trying it again. I'm sharing, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks and for having me, and here short who I am. Some of you already know, but well, like said, I'm chairing the Dutch NEN committee on computer ruimtes and data centers, and within my company Legrand, quite active regarding standards, coordinating all the standards regarding data centers in Europe. For those who don't know, Legrand makes a lot of products for data centers, both white space, gray space. I'm having about 40,000 colleagues around the world. We're active in over 100 countries, so there's a lot of things happening, and data centers are getting more and more important for us. And some brands of us are Raritan, Servertech, Starline, different ones who are part of Legrand and having their own brands. Myself, I'm quite active in the creation of standards, been involved in the EN5600 from the early starting, and actually a little bit of the layout of the EN5600 was developed back then in the Netherlands, and Germany took the initiative to have European data center standards, and then the Dutch group came up, okay, we already have some content to it, and that was used as the basis partly for the EN5600. And not only active within the EN5600, but also internationally, ISO IEC, and most of you know POE. And one of the parts I'm quite active and was in, I still am in having to do with KPIs, and one of them being POE, and more specific also a part on design POE. But that's not the subject for today. So the subject of today is EN5600, and another representation of the different parts. It is for sure the same, but you can see the different parts, and I want to now talk a little bit about the new part. This is very recent. It's a maturity model. And the maturity model, well, maybe some of you have heard of it, of the terminology before. So it was not invented by the EN5600 group, but actually it was done before, and it is based on the work of the Green Grid. And the Green Grid published a white paper, and that's over 10 years ago, I think 2011, published a white paper on the maturity model. And then later on actually asked the ISO-IEC group, could you take it aboard and make a standard out of it? That was tried. Canada did a lot of effort in putting that together, and it didn't work out. So they actually, the work item was taken back. And then a couple of years ago, it came back and it was asked if Europe could do it. And because we're quite successful in the European group to create standards, there was a group initiated, and we started with a 5600-5-1. And what we actually did is we took the work we already had, and that is the parts in the 99-1 and 2, and which are the recommended practices for energy management and the recommended practices for environmental sustainability. That's the two we asked as a basis for the maturity model. And here you got a diagram out of the 99-2. It's the one which is not that much known. The 99-1 is actually, we almost could say, a copy of the EU Code of Conduct best practices guide, which is used and transformed to be in the format of a standard. We also got in that same Code of Conduct on energy efficiency, there were a lot of practices actually which having to do with sustainability. That was extended in the past, and from that the 99-2 was created. And that's the difference a little bit. This is a TR, which means a technical report. And in that respect, it's a little bit different to a standard, that it can be updated quite easy. And the 99-1 and -2 do have an annual update, although the 91-1 also runs well at the same rate and uses the best practices which are also in the EU Code of Conduct. But what you see here is a diagram out of the 99-1, which has to do with sustainability. And so sustainability is also quite an important part, and it's getting more and more important, we think, at the moment. How is that used? Well, inside the 5600-5-1 maturity model, all the recommended practices out of those two technical reports are used. And actually was said, okay, for instance, there are different levels, and in the different levels, it is recommended, or actually it is required, to use certain practices. The more practice you use, the higher you get up in your maturity of your data center. So it is a way, it is intended a way for a data center to improve. It is not really made for data centers to compare, because data centers are quite different, and it depends on the type of data center what will be the output, which can be quite different for one data center than the other. So it's more the idea to have it for a data center and to improve in a certain way. But it's a way to measure your performance of your data center. And what's changing, because, well, the maturity model is just being released, but at this moment we're already working on an update. And why are we working on an update? Well, one of the things is, if at the moment you are using the current maturity model, you have to go all the way, you have to go back to the 99-1, 99-2, put that together, and we want to simplify it. So there it's partly, it's an editorial change, which will simplify it. And what we also will do is we only take those recommended practices which are part of the maturity model will be in the new one. So there will be a little bit left in the old 99-1 and 99-2. There will be recommended practices where we say which are not yet fit or are good enough, or for other reasons are not part of the maturity model. And what you're seeing at the right side, and I got it here enlarged, this is what can be one of the results of applying the maturity model. So you have a spider diagram in which you can see how mature you are. And actually you want to let this spider diagram grow, and you can see then, okay, I'm developing, I'm going on infrastructure, power supply and distribution, I go one level up. That can be done then, for instance, on regarding your energy efficiency, where you measure things like that, which are in the maturity model. Well, that is actually, I think, quite important that this is well developed. And at this moment, like Stijn said, there is interest also in groups like the Carbon Neutral Data Center Pact in using a maturity model or a certain way of the maturity model in measuring the performance of data center or having a minimum goal of reaching. Well, my last slide in Dutch. You're very welcome to help developing standards, and please contact me or Nen, and you're very welcome to contribute to it. That's my part. Thank you. Marc, I have to stop sharing. Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I stopped, so you can continue, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Niek. As we've just seen, there's a completely new section in the standard on the subject of environmental sustainability. And TÜV IT was happy about that because we already had a criteria catalog based on a maturity model since 2012. And with the new part 5 of the 50,600, we refurbished the TSE standard catalog at the beginning of 2021. And as a result, the TSE standard now covers the complete EN 50,600 maturity model. To bring the part 5 into data center praxis, the TSE standard provides a certification program with various certificates, as you can see here. And it makes the part 5 requirements some kind of manageable due to the criteria catalog, as Joachim mentioned. The criteria catalog supports the data center operators with an energy management system approach, which is based on the ISO 50001. And it applies the best practices of the European Code of Conduct, as Niek mentioned, in a flexible manner. So we are using a rating for each best practice. And this TSE catalog takes into account the EN 50,600 part 4-4, the KPIs. And yeah, for these KPIs, there were also news and updates. So the good old PUE was updated. Up to 2019, the PUE only considered electrical energy. So the new PUE takes into account additional types of energy as liquid fuels, gaseous fuels, cooling liquids. And this may be important, for example, if the data center is supplied by a combined heat and power plant or uses district cooling. And the diesel fuel for the generator must also be taken into account. I think most data center operators using PUE are not aware of this extension, but this may cause significant changes in the PUE value. So yeah, and in addition to the PUE update, there's also a new KPI, the water usage effectiveness. So this KPI was published as a draft European standard last week. And the water usage effectiveness shows how much water is used in a data center compared to the energy demand of the IT. This is important, for example, when using adiabatic cooling. And since water is a very complex topic, factors such as the water quality, like potable or non-potable water, the water used for energy production, or water stress levels to show the shortage of water in some regions, the land consumption caused, for example, by the data center building, and last but not least, the water reuse. Yeah, so that's it for the updates for -4 and -5.
Yeah, thanks for your attention. And I think we will now start the panel discussion. And there were some questions in the chat I've seen. So thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Yeah. So as Marc was already saying, there were a few questions during the registration. So when you registered for this webinar, you were able to already ask a few questions. We have a few questions selected, so we'll go through them first. And then if we have some time left, we can still answer the questions in the chat. So we'll get started with the selected questions. So Joachim, this first one is for you. This question is about what are the requirements for the EN 5600 on tiering? Can you answer that question?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Well, I saw the question and I wonder whether it should focus the comparison of the tier model and the EN 5600 model. I guess that's the focus. And of course, most of the audience will know also the tier approach of the Uptime Institute. And of course, it's quite normal to me that there arises this question, how is it comparable? And the tier model relies predominantly on availability aspects for the electrical and the mechanical system. And so far here, the fundamentals are quite comparable. And however, the EN 5600 has also distinctions regarding protection classes and energy efficiency measuring niveaus or levels. And this is, to my knowledge, not part of the uptime approach. So if we want to compare it, I would summarize it in a way that I say, okay, the EN 5600 is now even, or especially with the energy part and sustainability aspects, the more holistic approach on that. So it has all the components of availability, requirements, and demands from the market, but it has also the aspects of sustainability and on physical security. And on the tier model, it is very concentrated on the availability. And if you compare the tier 1 to tier 4 with the availability classes 1 to 4, of course, there are some differences, but more or less, they are very similar.
Sorry, thank you. Then the next question is for Volkmar. This is about the 2.5T test specification.
Yeah, I had the next two. I can read the first one. How is the loss of availability in case of a fire calculated according to a 2.5T test specification? I'm not really sure, honestly, how I can precisely answer that. A fire, first of all, is kind of unpredictable. If a fire completely destroys the content of a room or only partially damages the systems installed in a room, you don't know. And the availability, you're adding, for instance, redundant components to counteract all kinds of problems you may have, like technical problems, malfunctioning of technical components, but also, of course, if there is a fire, you should not lose your M&E support systems. So I'm not sure how I can precisely answer this. The loss of availability in case of fire. I mean, this, yeah, as I said, for any kind of technical organizational, operational, and other problems. There's redundancies in M&E systems. There are redundant rooms. There are fire retardant walls. So I don't know if the author of this question is in the audience today. Can you maybe please specify that a little further and what actually you're getting at? So I can also respond to that in writing. The next one is easier to answer. How does local code for fire protection of technical rooms interferes with minimum requirements of EN 5600? A very general statement. Local codes and regulations always have priority over any kind of technical standard. The EN 5600 as any other technical standard, they don't mention the conformity to local codes because that is a natural given. You always have to follow local codes and regulations first. But they have different priorities. Local codes and regulations are their main priority is the health and safety of staff, of people working in the data center or in also in any other kind of facility, while the technical standard, for instance, the 5600, has the primary goal of availability of technical infrastructures and maybe also energy efficiency. So the goals are different. But as I said initially, local codes and regulations always have to be followed first, no matter what you have in a standard. You know, a technical standard like the 5600, you can decide that you want to follow that. It's not a mandatory requirement unless it's mentioned in a law that you have to follow the standard. But always local codes and regulations, if it's fire codes, anything has to be followed first. I think that will answer that. And then I'll hand it over back to Joachim for the next one. The edge data centers.
So Joachim, the next question that came in was, do physical security regulations affect the design and certification for edge data centers?
Yeah, well, when the work starts on the EN 5600, this has been about in 2011, the edge data center has not been in mind at that time. And we have spoken about data centers of different sizes, of course, and different purposes. But I can't remember that the specification of edge data center played any role at that time. But nevertheless, during the years of development, there has been an initiative on the DKE, so the German committee on the EN 5600, and some people took the task to apply all the requirements of the EN 5600 to an edge data center to see whether they can be applied, whether it makes sense or not. And the interesting result on that has been that, of course, about 90% of all the requirements can or should or even must be applied also on edge data centers.
Thank you. Next question, maybe Niek, you can answer this one. The question is, why was PUE not included in the EN 5600?
Oh, well, actually in the beginning, we had a lot of work in the EN 5600 and we were very busy with doing all kinds of things regarding infrastructure. And there was an active group internationally with some of the same experts, and the international and ISO level, they started with putting work into the PUE. So we thought it's not viable to do the work again the same in Europe. So we waited in Europe until it was mature internationally, and then we copied them. And actually, and sometimes it's asked, why do we have quite similar POE in EN and in ISO? And this has also to do with, let's say, reference and legislation in some countries. Because in Europe, it's quite often, it's possible for local legislation and usage to refer to an EN standard, but it's harder to refer to an ISO IEC standard. And then that's one of the reasons we said it works better to have a copy of it actually in, or an almost copy as a EN. And also it might be, and that's and sometimes it helps to have some minor changes which apply to Europe and are not applicable to the rest of the world. I hope that answers it.
All right, thanks.
Okay, the next one is from me again. I'm reading the question. Can you please provide some syllabus of TSI professional training? Yes, I would love to. I'm one of the trainers of the TSI professional course. What's the course all about? It's a course over 2.5 days where we explain how we work as data center auditors. To engineers, to anybody who is interested. We may have a certification at a data center coming up and would like to know more before the actual audit and certification. It's a 2.5 day course, including on the last day some practical exercises. The course right now we offer in German and English, and until like 2 years ago we offered the course as an on-site course at various locations since German and English, but for the last 2 years the course has been mostly remote. Predictions for the future, I'm not sure yet. We have the first courses for this year planned in as on-site courses again, and then it depends how many people are interested. If you want more information, go to our website www.tuvit.de/en, and then you will find a variety of services offered. You will find more information about the course in data center, data minus centers minus location minus cloud infrastructures /training/TSI professional. So just go to the website and click at the appropriate icons, and that will give you lots of information about the TSI training course. I think there's also a form how you can sign up, enroll. And again, we have the course an average of 3 to sometimes 4 times a year, and in German and in English. So that's the TSI professional training. Next one.
Great, thanks.
Marc.
Yeah, so Marc, this question is for you. It's about what are the best ways to audit the new norm section of the EN 5600?
Yeah, so that's quite easy to answer. So the new parts of the 50600-2-1 and -2-5 can be audited with a TÜV-IT criteria catalog for the trusted site infrastructure. And the new topic, energy efficiency and sustainability, means the -5 and the -4. They can be audited with the TÜV-IT criteria catalog for trusted site energy efficiency version 2.0.
All right, thank you. So maybe we have 4 minutes left. So maybe there's a bit more time to answer some questions in the chat.
There was one question maybe quickly from Ad Melchius. I think he was the first one. Let me read this. Volkmar, are there also HVM requirements, or does this depend on the risk assessment? HVM, I assume he means hostile vehicle mitigation. Is that?
Yeah, Volkmar, that's correct.
Okay. To that, I could say this: the EN 5600 was kind of developed for European data centers, and it's more like the protection against either opportunistic intruders or people who just like when they park their car in front of the fence, they mistake the brake pedal for the accelerator and the car makes a jump forward. We do not really design data centers for like suicide bombers, because that's a completely different story. So in order to be quick, I believe that's definitely a topic for the risk assessment. If you have a data center at some other location in the world, in the Middle East, or I don't know, in the Ukraine, I don't know, I think you would design a data center completely different from the EN5600 as it is right now. No, the topic with the hostile cars, hostile vehicles is not really included in what we have right now. The 5600 is specifying minimum requirements, and I think that goes a little beyond this. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. The reason for my question is I see a lot of hyperscalers come with this kind of requirements. So that's the reason I asked this question.
If they see that as a risk, then you have to do something about it. But it's not really covered as a description or text or anything in the 5600 as it is right now. This is definitely a topic for risk assessment.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one last question that can be answered. Perhaps the first one, if the question is if there are any areas of alignment between the EN5600 and the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact. Is this a question someone could answer, or?
I think that would be for Stijn, or not?
Yeah, he actually had to leave, so he's not able to answer the question anymore. Okay, well, we can also cover one other question in the chat. Does anybody see a question that is a good one to answer? I think Marc is also already answering a few via text, so please check out the chat.
There was one question regarding the website link for the training. Of course, we're happy to provide that to you. I'm sure Joachim can take care of this, or I could also do this, of course. There was one question about the relationship between 5600 and ISO 14000. I don't know, can anybody answer that from our side?
Yeah, I've just answered in a chat. So there is a strong relationship between 50600 and the ISO 50001, but the relationship to the ISO 14000 is not very strong. You can use the KPIs from the -4 of the 50600, but it's much more interesting to use the strong relationship to the ISO 50001.
All right. Yeah, Karim also just texted the link in the chat for.
Yeah, great. We have exactly 3:30 precise.
Perfect. Well, I think then it's a great time to close the webinar. Thank you to the speakers and experts on this this topic. And yeah, feel free to contact, of course, 2FIT or DDA or Legrand for any specific questions you still have. And thank you to everyone, of course, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and happy Easter.
Yes, thank you.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy Easter.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Happy Easter to everyone.